Welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court handed down several decisions today. One of them was Arizona versus the Intertribal Council of Arizona. Sounds a little dull, but it's not. This case is all about voting rights. The decision effectively struck down an Arizona state law that required people registering to vote in federal elections for president or Senate or Congress to provide proof of their citizenship. The provision required people registering to vote to prove that they were citizens by sending in copies of various documents, whether it's your birth certificate, your passport, naturalization papers, or a state's driver's license. The question facing the court was whether that conflicted with the National Voter Registration Act, which allows voters to register using a form that just asks if you're a citizen under penalty of perjury. 7-2 decision, and this is one of these odd ones where you had Justices Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito dissenting, so you had the Ginsburgs and the Scalias on the same side of this argument, at least in the ruling today. And from my understanding of this, this is not to be confused with the voter ID thing where you go to the polls and you show your ID in order to be able to vote. This is just about registering to vote. Right. Let's talk about this just overall. Do you like the idea of having to prove citizenship to register to vote?
Well, it was a big problem to start off with because they're saying you need to have to show and bring copies of your papers, and you are unable and you are not able to copy the naturalization papers, for instance. So right there was problems in the way this
certainly
law was
making it more difficult to register.
Well, yeah, because you can't copy them. So how are you supposed to submit them? So, you know, to a certain extent, I found the bill itself, the Arizona law itself, not only conflicting with the national law, but also faulty.
Yeah, interesting. Voters, I know my colleague will disagree.
But you're smiling.
I'm smiling because it was all about voter suppression, period. And you have to have one set of rules. You can't have each state going off the ranch deciding they're going to do whatever they want to do to suppress the Democratic vote.
I mean, first of all, let me say there was at least 3 members of the conservative members of the Supreme Court who joined this decision, and I think this is the right decision. One, you know, we already have low voter turnout. 2, this was a very high burden. It didn't, and without a compelling governmental interest to override that high burden of trying to provide your citizenship. This was nothing about voter suppression. Obviously, in some of these states, including Arizona, there's an issue, or even if it's a perceived issue, of people who are illegal voting in elections, and that is against the law. And they're going to have to come up with something else to do about that. But I think certainly you should follow the law when it comes to voting, and that is if you cannot vote, you shouldn't vote. But this wasn't the right type of legislation to do that.
I want to read a couple of comments that we got on Facebook. I want to start with Paul Sengels, who wrote in, I just bought Sudafed at the CVS and needed to show ID. I guess voting isn't important in the new America. He does make a point there. I don't agree with the point, but he does make the point. It's if you got to show your driver's license to get Sudafed from a pharmacy, shouldn't we at least consider making this a similar standard to register to vote?
That's certainly different. I mean,
completely different.
Yeah, this is just proving your citizenship. But the voter ID laws, you're just proving who you are. You're not proving that you're a citizen. That's different. And certainly that issue has come up and was rejected by some courts, including, I believe, in Pennsylvania, where they rejected the voter ID law as being very burdensome. We were required to actually have date of birth and an expiration date, so your college ID wouldn't qualify, for example. But when you go to vote, you're asked for your at least here in Westchester, you're asked for your last 4 Social Security, and according to the HAVA law, when you go to vote, you have to provide either proof of residence or some type of identification for the first time you vote. So there are some restrictions.
Well, and again, that's not the subject matter that the court was dealing with today. It's not at the polls. This is registering.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. I mean, this is like when the League of Women Voters goes out with their forms to register people. People are not, you know, we do this on college campuses a lot. That is a population that needs to be registered. We try to register them with groups like the League of Women Voters, and they are not walking around with papers that they could produce, and they aren't walking around with copies of those papers. So you can't make voting that, or registration to vote that difficult. You have to make it so people can register. It's a different thing when you go in to actually cast your ballot.
And I agree. I mean, I think you need to try to make it as easy as possible to get people to register and to vote. I mean, after all, it's a right, and so it should work that way. It should.
It's a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege.
Well, but the presumption should be that you're able to until somebody says otherwise. But I want to take one other view on this, and this is from Eva Mills, who wrote in, there should be an identification card so that you can only get when you prove you have legal citizenship, and only holders of that card should be able to vote. There's been some talk of that around immigration too, about having a card that people would have or some sort of national ID. That may be gaining some momentum as you start looking at people's reactions to, let's say, the NSA spying. People don't seem to have that much of an objection to the government keeping track of where they are.
But that raises a huge issue because this is an Arizona state law. That side of the debate that wanted this are not going to want the national government to come in with an ID like that. I mean, because that's nationalizing a process they want to keep at the state and local level. So that, I agree that that is something to consider and people have considered it, but it's something that's not going to be popular with people who supported this type of Arizona law.
New York's favorite Republican, Ted Cruz, has already said that he's going to submit a bill that would reverse this decision. So I'm sure we'll be able to have this debate again as we go forward. We're going to take a quick break, but in the meantime, we want you to join in on this conversation. Should you have to prove citizenship in order just to register to vote? Head to Facebook or to Twitter and sound off. Meanwhile, up next, the race for City Hall 2013, Christine Quinn is slamming her opponents, or at least she's trying to. Meanwhile, Anthony Weiner gets some pretty negative press coverage, and it has nothing to do with Twitter or unfortunate pictures, at least this time. It's the race for City Hall next. Stay with us.